The room was tense, the air electric, as if the walls themselves knew a political storm was about to erupt. Cameras rolled, microphones buzzed, and the nation's eyes locked onto a single explosive moment. Then it happened. James Comer, red-faced, fists tight against the desk, screamed across the chamber, "Stop talking!" It wasn't just a request. It wasn't even a command. It was a raw, desperate scream, the kind of sound that makes the audience freeze in disbelief, the kind of sound that told the world this man was losing control. Jasmine Crockett, sitting across from him, didn't flinch, not even for a second. No raised eyebrow, no angry comeback, no flustered stutter. She simply leaned back, calm as a still lake, and let silence do the work. That silence alone was louder than his scream. It told the world, "You don't shake me that easily." The audience watching, both in the chamber and at home, felt the contrast. Comer was fire and fury, lashing out like a cornered animal. Crockett was ice, steady, measured, unbothered. And that clash of energies, fire against ice, was the spark that turned this hearing into a political theater no one would forget. What Comer didn't realize in that heated moment was that his scream, his demand for silence, had set the stage for his own undoing. Because what came next from Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a response. It was a dismantling, calm, precise, and devastating. The scream still echoed in the chamber, "Stop talking!" But Jasmine Crockett refused to hand him the victory of silence. She adjusted the microphone slowly, deliberately, as if every second of composure was a blade twisting deeper into Comer's unraveling temper. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't frantic. It was calm, measured, surgical. "Congressman Comer," she began, her tone smooth as glass. "If you believe shouting is the same as debating, then perhaps you've already admitted you have no real argument left." The chamber shifted. Some gasps, some muffled laughs, but most of all, attention. The kind of attention only a perfectly timed clapback can earn. Comer's face twitched, his lips tightening as if he had swallowed his own fury. Jasmine continued, not rushing, not raising her voice, every word landing with the weight of someone who knew the cameras were capturing every second. "You wanted me to stop talking," she said, leaning slightly forward, "because the truth makes you uncomfortable. But let me remind you, Congressman, this chamber isn't your stage alone. The American people are listening. And what they've just heard is a man who cannot handle a woman's voice when it tells inconvenient facts. It was more than just a rebuttal. It was theater. Crockett wasn't speaking to Comer anymore. She was speaking to history, to headlines, to every viewer glued to their screens. She understood the moment. She owned the moment. Comer tried to cut in, his hand jerking upward, his mouth already half open with another outburst. But Crockett didn't stop. She pressed on, her words stacking like bricks in a wall Comer couldn't climb. "You scream at me to stop," she declared, her voice steady. "But all you've done is expose your fear. Fear of being questioned, fear of accountability, fear that when the noise is stripped away, your arguments collapse under their own weight." The silence after her words was thunderous. For a brief moment, the chamber seemed frozen, suspended between Comer's boiling rage and Crockett's icy defiance. And that's when the audience realized this wasn't just an exchange. This was a turning point, a battle of control. And Jasmine Crockett had just taken the wheel. James Comer's face flushed crimson. His jaw tightened, his fist slammed against the desk. The microphone shook with the vibration. He wasn't just angry, he was humiliated, and humiliation has a sound. It isn't calm. It isn't reasoned. It's loud, desperate, cracking at the edges. "This is outrageous," he bellowed, his voice cracking under the strain. "You don't get to lecture me. You don't get to twist my words. You sit there acting so smug while I... But he couldn't finish the sentence. The words dissolved into noise, sputters, fragments of a man who had lost the thread of control. His anger was no longer sharp, it was messy, and messy anger doesn't dominate a room. It embarrasses the speaker. The audience in the chamber shifted again. this time with whispers and murmurs that grew like ripples in water. Some looked down uncomfortably, others exchanged smirks they tried to hide. The cameras caught it all. The entire nation, watching live, saw the exact moment Comer's fury stopped looking powerful and started looking pitiful. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett sat still, not a muscle out of place. She let his tantrum play out like a bad performance, her eyes fixed on him with the calm patience of someone who knew the stage was hers. Every second he shouted was another second he exposed himself. Then came her turn again. She leaned into the microphone, her voice cutting through the air like a quiet storm. "Congressman," she said softly, almost kindly, "I don't need to twist your words. They collapse all on their own. Every scream, every desk slam, every outburst. This is not strength. This is fear dressed up as noise." The chamber froze again. Comer's face contorted, caught between rage and the creeping awareness that the audience was no longer on his side. The power dynamic had shifted, fully and completely. He was fighting to be heard, but Crockett was fighting to be remembered. And in that battle, memory always wins. The room was heavy with tension, but Jasmine Crockett carried it as if it weighed nothing. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need theatrics. Her calm was the weapon, and it was sharper than any scream James Comer could throw. She adjusted her papers, flipped one page deliberately, and began speaking with the precision of a surgeon. "Congressman Comer," she said evenly, "you've accused, you've shouted, and you've demanded silence. But let's do something you clearly find uncomfortable. Let's deal with the facts." She held up a document, tapping it once for emphasis. The cameras zoomed in. The sound of that single tap echoed louder than his desk-slamming rage. "You claimed transparency," she continued, "yet your own record shows contradiction after contradiction. You scream, 'Stop talking,' when I raise these points because you know the moment I finish, the truth is undeniable." Comer fidgeted in his chair, gripping his pen like it might rescue him. His lips pressed into a thin line, the redness in his face deepening. But he didn't interrupt this time. Not because he didn't want to, but because every interruption only fed her power. Jasmine pressed on, her voice smooth, almost soothing, yet loaded with iron. "You want this chamber to be your stage," she said, glancing at him with measured control. "But today, you've performed a confession without even realizing it. The louder you shout, the clearer your fear becomes. The angrier you get, the more you expose the weakness in your own case. You don't silence me, you silence yourself." The audience felt it. The silence wasn't just awkward anymore, it was damning. People shifted in their seats not out of boredom, but because the weight of Crockett's words pressed on everyone in the room. Comer wasn't just losing the argument, he was unraveling on live television, and then came the final twist of the knife. Crockett leaned forward, locked eyes with him, and in a voice barely above a whisper said, "You wanted me to stop talking. But, Congressman, the truth doesn't stop. Not for you. Not for anyone." The line landed like a thunderclap. A perfect blend of calm and power, the kind of sentence that headlines are made of. Comer sat frozen, trapped by the moment. This wasn't just debate anymore. This was domination, quiet, relentless, unforgettable. James Comer could feel the ground slipping beneath him. The spotlight he thought was his had been ripped away and seized by Jasmine Crockett. And the more he realized it, the more desperate he became to claw it back. He slammed his palm against the table once more, his voice cracking with a mixture of anger and panic. This is nothing but a circus. You think this is about truth? You're grandstanding. You're twisting facts to smear my name." His words tumbled out, frantic, unpolished, dripping with desperation. He wasn't speaking to Jasmine anymore. He wasn't even speaking to the chamber. He was pleading with the cameras, with the audience at home, as though begging someone, anyone, to believe him. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her silence in those first few seconds of his rant was louder than his screaming. And when she finally spoke, her tone was icy, calm, and devastatingly controlled. "Congressman Comer," she said, her voice cutting through his noise like a knife through glass. You keep calling this a circus. But if it is, then the loudest clown in the room has already revealed himself. The chamber erupted. Some gasps, some muffled laughter, and above all, that collective sound of recognition. Everyone knew who she meant. Comer's face burned crimson, his mouth opening to retort, but the words caught in his throat. Jasmine leaned closer, her voice low but commanding, every syllable calculated for impact. You can call me names. You can shout until your voice cracks. But here's the truth. Shouting doesn't erase evidence. Insults don't erase accountability. And tantrums don't erase lies. Her words hit him like strikes in a boxing match, each one deliberate, each one landing. Comer tried to shift, tried to interject, but the rhythm of her control kept him pinned. She continued, steady and relentless. You wanted this chamber to see me silenced. Instead, they've seen you exposed. Not by my voice, Congressman, but by your own. The room fell silent again, a silence so sharp it felt like the entire building was holding its breath. Comer sat stiff, his hands trembling slightly, his fury now tinged with something far worse, embarrassment. And Jasmine? She simply leaned back, her composure unbroken, her calm unshakable. She didn't need to raise her voice. She had already won. The chamber felt like a stage on the brink of its finale. James Comer sat there, breathing hard, his tie loosened, his palms sweaty. Every outburst had backfired. Every scream had become ammunition for his opponent. He wanted to lash out again, but for the first time in his career, he realized every word he spoke was digging the hole deeper. The silence stretched, and in that silence, Jasmine Crockett rose, not literally, but in presence, in command, in absolute control of the narrative. She didn't need to shout. She didn't even need to look angry. Her calm was louder than any rage Comer could muster. She leaned slightly forward, her voice steady as steel. Congressman Comer, history doesn't remember the loudest voices. It remembers the clearest truths. And today, the truth is painfully clear. The audience leaned in. Cameras zoomed. Every ear in the chamber tuned to her. You screamed at me to stop talking, she said, her words sharp as a scalpel. But what you really wanted to stop was accountability. You wanted silence because you couldn't handle the sound of your own contradictions echoing back at you. And now, everyone can hear it. Comer shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming against the desk, but his eyes betrayed the realization. He had no comeback left. Jasmine delivered the finishing blow, her voice firm but calm, almost too calm, the kind of calm that cuts deeper than fury ever could. You've exposed yourself far more than you ever exposed me. And that, Congressman, is the difference between noise and truth. You shout to be heard. I speak to be remembered. The words hung in the air, heavy, final, undeniable. The chamber erupted, not in chaos, but in that unmistakable hum of realization, that energy that fills a room when everyone knows they've just witnessed the defining moment. James Comer slumped back, deflated, his eyes darting to the cameras he once thought were his allies. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, sat tall, poised, unshaken. She hadn't just survived the storm. She had become the storm. This wasn't just a debate. It was a dismantling, a lesson, a reminder that calm in the face of chaos is the greatest power of all. As the hearing wound down, the room no longer belonged to James Comer. The man who had stormed in with bluster and fire left in silence, his shouts reduced to echoes of desperation. Every slam of the desk, every crack in his voice, every scream of "Stop talking," had become evidence, not of Crockett's weakness but of his own unraveling. Jasmine Crockett didn't need to declare victory. She didn't need to gloat. Her calm composure was the victory. Her silence between his tantrums was louder than his screams. Her steady words had cut sharper than any insult. And by the time the cameras stopped rolling, it was clear to everyone watching. Comer hadn't silenced her. He had exposed himself. The audience at home replayed the moment again and again. The scream, the desk slam, the quiet smirk on Crockett's face, and that final line. You shout to be heard. I speak to be remembered. It wasn't just a response. It was history in the making. On social media, clips began to spread like wildfire. Some called it a meltdown. Others called it a masterclass. But no matter what side of the aisle they stood on, one fact couldn't be denied. James Comer had lost control, and Jasmine Crockett had owned the stage with nothing more than calm, truth, and precision. This wasn't just political theater. It was a lesson in the power of restraint, a lesson in how composure can dismantle chaos, a lesson in how truth, delivered with clarity, will always outlast the loudest noise. And as the curtain fell on that explosive hearing, one thought lingered in every viewer's mind. When history writes this chapter, it won't remember the scream. It will remember the silence that followed, and the calm voice that turned it into power.